You can't stop me now. Can't stop me now. My feet have come too far for you to tie 'em to the ground.
How's it going, everybody? My name is Grant DeYoung. You're watching the Repti-verse. Today we're going to be talking all about the Burmese python, which is what I have right here. This is Sirius. He is my about a year-old male Burmese python. He is actually the snake that I talked about in my last video that escaped for about a month, and I found him in the basement sink. So right away, I'm going to start off by saying everything that I say is based off of my own experience and my own research. I do not know everything there is to know about Burmese pythons. I don't know everything there is to know about their care. I've never owned a fully grown Burmese python. So take that all into account when you're listening to me talk about Burmese pythons, which are one of my favorite snakes to keep, if not my absolute favorite snake to keep. So the first thing you'll want to look into when you're getting or thinking about getting a Burmese python is your local laws. A lot of places these are illegal to keep. In Florida, I know recently they completely banned Burmese pythons, so you can't get a Burmese python in Florida now. So just make sure that your state and local laws, you want to make sure that you check your local laws, because sometimes if something is legal on a state level, your specific county will not allow it. So just double check that your state and your county will allow you to keep these animals. So now I'm going to go into the temperament of the Burmese python. As you can see, Burmese pythons, especially captive bred and born Burmese pythons like Sirius here, can be incredibly docile snakes. I've definitely seen a few Burmese pythons that are not docile, that are very, very skittish and very defensive snakes. But for the most part, they're kind of the puppy dogs of the snake world. It's like a ball python in a gigantic body. So I really don't worry about taking a bite from this snake. He has only ever defensively struck at me one time since I've had him, and that was my fault. I was doing pictures with him, and I just got my camera a bit too close, and the camera spooked him, and he struck out and tried to bite it. But I left him alone for a few hours and came back, and he was perfectly fine. But as you can see, when I have him out and I'm handling him, he's great. He is one of my favorite animals to pull out and show to everybody, just because of how docile he is. But that's one of the reasons I would definitely suggest you get yourself a captive bred and born Burmese python, because I have seen a few people, a couple of my close friends, have gotten wild caught Burmese pythons that are caught down in the Everglades, since it's illegal to bring Burmese pythons into the States now, and they are very defensive snakes. They haven't been around people much, and the interactions they've had with people before being in my friend's care has not been great. So if you want a very well-behaved snake, captive bred is the way to go. Now I'm going to talk about the quite literal elephant in the room, the Burmese python's size. So as you can see, what I said at the beginning of the video, my Burmese python is about a year old. He's a pretty substantial snake already. He's about the size of most adult spotted or children's pythons that I see. And he's about as long as my ball python, just not nearly as thick and robust as a ball python. But they don't stay this way. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize when they're getting into Burmese pythons. They'll see a snake like this in a pet store or at a reptile expo, and immediately they will think, oh, that's a really cute snake. It's a really small snake. It might stay that big, so I'm going to go ahead and buy it. They don't. Burmese pythons definitely have the capability of averaging between 10 to 15 feet long. So it's a very, very large species of snake. They're the third or fourth largest snake in the world, depending on how you look at it. I believe the record was a 23-foot female Burmese python. Although a 23-foot Burmese python is very uncommon. It's very uncommon that you're going to find one like that unless you are seriously power feeding your snake. But then with their large size comes their large enclosure size. In my personal opinion, this is my opinion, the absolute bare minimum, you should even go bigger than this, but the absolute bare minimum enclosure size for an adult Burmese python is an 8 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot. I hold the standard for all reptiles that bigger is better. That's why I have my ball python of what I believe is the bare minimum enclosure size, which is roughly 75 gallons. She's in a 4-foot PVC enclosure, but it's not 2 feet tall. It's like 14 inches tall, which is closer to 75 gallons than 120. But I believe that, especially with a snake like this, that, as I said, could potentially get 15 foot long, even larger, you shouldn't be keeping them in a rack. I don't like racks for large constrictors like this. So yeah, 8-foot enclosure is what I would absolutely recommend for an adult. He's about to get a custom 4-foot enclosure at this size. Yeah, so it's a very large enclosure, and it's going to take up a large portion of your room. I mean, if you're somebody like me, and you see behind me, this is all my animal stuff, I'm going to have floor-to-ceiling PVC enclosures between like 8-foot, 4-foot, and 6-foot sizes. So, if you have a bigger reptile room like I have now, it's usually not a problem to have that big of an enclosure. But you just really want to think about how much space you have, because you don't want to get a snake and then realize after you've got it, oh no, I don't have the space for a fully grown Burmese python's enclosure. Now I'm going to talk about the feeding of the Burmese pythons. Right now, my Burmese python, he is at what I would consider to be a very good weight for a Burmese python. He's not fat, but he doesn't have a lot of spine showing, because if you have a very skinny snake, you'll see their spine. And he is coming right over to that tripod. Can't climb on that right now, because then the wonderful people in the YouTube world won't be able to see you. I absolutely love this snake. But so right now he eats once a week. He eats a single rat pup, and if you want a snake that's going to be able to keep eating things as small as rat pups, don't get a Burm. When he's fully grown, I expect he'll either be eating jumbo rats or he'll be eating rabbits. If you've seen Brian Barchuk's channel, he even feeds some of his Burmese pythons prey items like pigs. So they need very, very large meals, because it's definitely not as healthy for a snake to be fed like multiple smaller prey items than just one that's about as big around as they are. So because they eat such big prey items, that is why their feeding costs so much. So next thing we're going to talk about is the cost of the Burmese python. So the snake itself, I paid $200 for this guy here. You can pay a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on who you get them from. Definitely get them from a reputable breeder. So when the snake runs you about $200, not a lot of people want to go out and spend a ton of money on the care. Why would you want to spend $1,000 on just the enclosure alone for this size snake? But that's what you need to be willing to do if you're going to get a reptile like this. They are very expensive, and they live about 20 to 30 years, so they're going to be around for a very, very long time. And not even with just the buying the snake and the enclosure and the decor for the enclosure and the heating and the lighting, because yes, you do also have to buy lighting for these animals. They cannot live in pitch darkness their whole lives. You also have to pay to feed these animals. Now, when they get to being full grown, like I said, mine eats about once a week. It's, I think, roughly like $2, maybe a little give or take, per week to feed this guy. But I've been looking, because of course I want to be prepared for all my animals, and a full-grown Burmese python eating a rabbit costs between $15 to $25 a month, which, in the grand scheme of pets that you can own, $15 to $25 a month is not that much money. I mean, I used to work at PetSmart, don't work there anymore because I abhor the conditions they keep their animals in. But when I worked at PetSmart, we would have regulars that come in that spend $100 a week on dog food, which I didn't realize that dogs are so expensive, and that makes me all the more grateful that I have my scaly dogs. So, after everything that I've said, you can probably piece together whether or not you think that a Burmese python is or is not the right and all for you. This was not a care guide, by the way. If this was a care guide, I'd be going much more into depth about heat and humidity, things like that. This is just my honest thoughts after a year of keeping Burmese pythons, how they should be kept, and what to look for if you are interested in getting a Burmese python or you think that a Burmese python might be the right pet for you. If you love a reptile, and I want to hammer this home right now, if you absolutely love a reptile, you love Burmese pythons, and you've never kept a snake before, if you do your research, my video right here is not enough research. Like I said at the beginning, I don't know everything there is to know about these snakes. There are much more knowledgeable people than me out there. So go do your research, and if you decide that you can afford to care for reptiles, or if you can't afford to care for this large of a reptile and house this large of a reptile, and you want it, go get it. Do it. Don't listen to those beginner lists that tell you to get a ball python first. I love ball pythons, but my ball python, if I had her out in this video, she wouldn't have been this active or this fun to handle. She would have just sat in my hand. And so she would have done. Personally, I definitely don't think a Burmese python is for everybody. I think that if you do your research, like I've hammered home, research. If you've done your research, they can be a very good pet reptile. But they're definitely not for everybody. So, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video in any capacity, please click like. If you didn't enjoy the video, click dislike and tell me why you didn't enjoy the video so that I can improve in the future. And be sure to join me next time. I'm trying to get to a definitive schedule of one video a week. So I'm going to use my day off every week, which is usually Wednesday and Thursday, to film, edit, and upload a video. So definitely subscribe and turn on notifications for those videos if you haven't done so already. Peace out, YouTube.